All right, Imperfect Parenting. We're back at it with Seth Dahl.
Yeah.
Coming in.
It's a new month.
It's a new month. We're having fun.
We've just finished talking about a lot of sex and stuff the last couple months.
This is true.
It is true.
And it's good.
It is.
It's needed. We're just trying to create courage for families.
Yeah.
That's it. Parents, you can do this. It's hard. But
Healthy.
I'm excited about, Seth's probably going to cover most of the heavy lifting on this one, but I'm excited for it. I think it's where we are as parenting, and even the last chapter of my book is this call to action on families and not conforming and knowing what we're fighting for, and that's where we're at.
That's where we're at.
And but we do have a great meme because that's kind of where we're at.
We do have a great meme that goes perfectly. You want to say
Am I ready?
that?
Yeah. Here we go. You ready?
This one also kind of though needs people to go on social media
It's
and
true.
look at it.
You're missing out if you're not following us.
We
on
cannot
social.
do it justice with our voices only.
No. So we're going to describe it, but go check this one out.
It's just a sweet little girl.
So just as Brittney described, we're really talking today about your kids are going into a war zone most days.
Mm-hmm.
When they're connected with people, when they're at school, when they're in the world.
When they're on a screen.
When they're on a screen, there we go. They are in a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
And but the truth is they have a spirit that's greater than the spirit in the world inside of them, which sets me up to share this meme. So here we go. So there's this little girl, very cute little picture of her, like the first day of school type picture.
She's in a little uniform.
Little tie, very cute.
Matching bow.
Hair is beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And you fast forward to she's getting home from school.
It's
I'll
like a
describe that in
before
just
and
a
after
second.
photo,
Before and after school. This picture of this little girl, before and after school, has me howling, said the person who wrote this, because this little girl has crazy hair, the tie's a mess, the jacket's falling off, her face looks like, let me get home.
She got her backpack just hanging off her arm.
She does not look
Oh
like
my
the
gosh.
same child that
She went
left
through
the
it
house.
today, but she's still standing. And it says, somebody get her some Capri Sun on the rocks. She's been through it.
So great.
Go check this one out.
You need a juice on the rocks right now.
I mean, this is kind of I remember having a conversation with Lincoln when he was wanting me to do something that his friends' parents said he could do. And I said, son, I will not be parenting you like anyone else's parents.
Yeah.
I'm going to parent you the way that the Lord says I should be parenting you. I'm your mother, no one else's mommy.
Yeah.
And, you know, the same goes for all the different situations like we've walked through that are big, hard. The world says do this, or the world doesn't understand why we're so willing to fight for connection as a value.
Yeah.
And I think that's just, that's what your kids are in battle, whether they're in a public school or not. Everywhere right now, the deceiver is just trying to wear them down.
Yeah.
Especially parents, I think. So.
Yeah. Speaking of the battle and just where we're at, you know, this is society as a whole right now. It's like kind of it's not just our kids, it's us as well. Everyone's kind of in this war, but I just been really feeling like where we're at is kind of in the book of Daniel, where Babylon comes in and takes over. And Babylon in Hebrew means confusion. So confusion comes in, confusion takes over, confusion brings all these, you know, it says, this is Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. It says, the king instructed Ashpenaz, something like that, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So, you know, they take all these
Smart
kids, young people who are incredibly talented, gifted, smart, intelligent, and pretty much the first thing they do is change their names. So you'll no longer be called.
So crazy, especially when you're rooted in evil. You're changing their names to fit your agenda.
Yeah. So you have confusion going. You are not who your parents named you to be. You are not.
Come on.
The name they chose for you, or maybe God chose for you. You are now a different person. And in the Bible, names always have significance for identity. It's who you are. It's your name. Like, And it's like, oh, you have an identity given to you from confusion, not your parents, not God, because you're God's people, but now you're our people. And so that's where we're at as a whole. We're like, oh, everyone's really confused. And that little girl looks like she's been through it, but in public school, on the screens, everywhere, it seems like confusion is trying to confuse our children and change what they believe about themselves.
Well, I know one of the reasons we're not in public school anymore is the agenda to be leading the identity of your child. Education has stepped in and says, you know what? I think we're gonna do it from here.
Yeah.
And we saw that a lot in COVID. Just even you could see parents going to war with their schools on, you're overstepping your boundary, you're overstepping your authority, which is exactly this. You've overstepped your authority and you're trying to create confusion and replace it as a new identity.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, whether you're in public school or not, this is one of the biggest reasons why we moved out. But it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
This same agenda is everywhere. It's on
agenda of confusion.
I love Disney movies. I think I grew up with them, but now we watched something, or we were going to watch something, and I'm like, oh, but I don't think we're going to watch that one. And he's like, why does it have to be in everything?
Yeah.
I said, it's because they're trying to confuse you. Mm-hmm. And that's just the same thing that's going on here is we're trying to pull you away from your true identity in him and make you of this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that real quick. Just the confusion feels like it's deeply connected to the conformity too, which I think is where you're going. But they want to conform these little foot soldiers at some level, these children, into conform to how we think, which changes your identity, changes your name, just all things you're talking about. And
your mission in life. It's like they're clay. Children are like sponges.
Yeah. Yeah, these guys are brought in to serve the king, to serve the government. You will now do what the government tells you. You will do what the king tells you, no matter how you were raised. Yep. And I think, what's interesting here is it's really cool to kind of, I never saw this before until we were talking about it before the episode, but like, oh, Daniel's the one that wrote this book. Right away, his name actually gets changed to Belteshazzar. So Daniel has a different name, but he never refers to himself as Belteshazzar. He never in the book of Daniel refers to, I don't think ever. Maybe he does a couple times, but for the most part, we know this is the book of Daniel, not the book of Belteshazzar. So he doesn't refer to himself as the name confusion gave him. He keeps his name, which helps him not compromise, not conform, stand up, not give in. And the people he's mentoring, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which that's their name from confusion because they had different names before, they also are then empowered to not bow down. Okay, you're going to get thrown in the fire, but they had the ability to not bow down. And Daniel, it looks to me like he just refused to accept that identity.
Which makes me think about how courage is contagious, and the courage to stay in tune with your true identity kind of gives even more permission to be courageous.
Yeah.
It's such a key in what you're saying, Seth. I feel like there's such a key right here. And I think part of this starts with parents just connecting even with their own father. I said this on the Kylo show recently. I was on there and a while back and we talked through this, but Jason Velton, he's taught me lots of things. If you don't know who Jason Velton is in Braveco, men especially, go check it out. But one of the things he says is in inviting our spiritual father to come father me in certain areas.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the ways we actually keep our identity is inviting him in, inviting spiritual leaders in our life. Come father me in this area so I don't lose this battle by myself.
Yeah.
And even what you're describing with the three men that he was mentoring.
Yeah.
There's this flow happening in their life that he has taken a stand. And then watching him going, okay, that's how I want to live.
Yeah.
There's two options here, and I'm choosing this one.
Yeah. And it kind of feels like that's where a lot of us are at. Like, oh, you're trying to put us in the lion's den. Oh, you're trying to throw us in the furnace. Oh, and do we have the people around us helping us stay strong? Are we helping our kids stay strong? I think it was really powerful. We were just talking a little bit ago, like this place, because I was like, what? How did he do this? Like what was it? But in the place where in Daniel chapter 6, where, they've just announced like, hey, you can't pray to any other gods or you're going in the lion's den, right? So it just says, verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. So I read this and I'm going, oh, he's got a habit of connecting with God through prayer, thanksgiving. He's on his knees, humility. He, as a child, was connecting with God multiple times a day. And when something came against that, he just kept doing what was put in him as a child. And that whole thing of like, you come into his presence with thanksgiving. It's like, Daniel's like, I'm going into the presence of God. You're going to threaten me. You're going to try to confuse me. You're going to try to get me to change and conform. And I'm just going to go connect with God like I have from childhood. And that to me, I remember when we were running children's ministry together, I was like, this was always something that kind of hit me. Like, I want to instill something in them as children that becomes so normal. And it's like, no matter what comes, you just go connect with God. No matter what comes, stay grateful, stay thankful. Yeah. Get down on your knees and be thankful no matter who's looking, no matter who's watching, no matter what they're threatening you with, no matter what they're going to do. I'm like, but that's for us as parents, I feel like, that's like a call.
Yeah.
To me, that's a call of like, what am I instilling in my children with their connection to God?
That's when we were in children's ministry together. I was in the younger grades, so like 0 to
little
kindergarten.
Guys.
And one of the things I always told our workers was, you do not know who's in your room.
Yeah.
You do not know that whatever encounter you help bring them into with the Lord, however you communicate love, affection, modeling heaven, you don't know if anyone else is that model or if you're it.
Yeah.
You've got to pay attention to, you could have the next Billy Graham in your room.
Yeah.
Or you could have the next radical salvation story that's going to bring a revival because this person goes off the rails, becomes dry, whatever, but has an encounter with the Lord that reminds them of this moment that they were a child.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
So just the awareness and intentionality of, seeking first the kingdom of God and then bringing it down to earth with these little people because of their youth. You don't know what this one encounter is going to happen. I don't know how many kids. You did street ministry in New York.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know any of kids that went crazy and came back to the Lord, but it was because of that, this faithfulness of, that moment of my youth. Maybe it was a daily habit. Maybe it was a one-time thing, but the power of the Lord, it just marks them.
Another thing we saw too sometimes is it wasn't necessarily they were coming back directly to God. They were coming back to the person that they knew loved them. It was like, some of those kids, it was like, the only Jesus you ever see is our teams, is our people. And so when things are going crazy and stuff's happening, you're going to that person because they've shown you the love of God. You've been hugged by them where you're not getting hugged by other people. And they would come back to the people who were connected to God with them.
Because they could feel God.
They could feel, And so that's important too. Oh, man. Yeah, we saw kids do that stuff all the time. And, even my own story, like for me, I'm like, wow, thinking about this and the whole like, Father, will you come father me in these places? I need God too. I need men. I need people. Yep. We need each other. I'm like, help each other, ask questions. But at the same time, like, I need the Father to help me with this. And I remember when I was 5 years old, I couldn't tie my shoes. Like, I did not know how to tie my shoes. No one could teach me. I can't figure it out. I'm discouraged, defeated. Sure. And in a dream in kindergarten, the Father walks up to me and shows me how to tie my shoes. And when I woke up from the dream, it made perfect sense. And I understood totally how to tie my shoes. I'm like, And that encounter I had with God as a 5-year-old kid has helped me in my parenting now. It's helped me in ministry. It's helped me in everything. It's like, I'm not getting this from someone else. Lord, Father, I need you to come show me. It was like it was like the Father actually came and met me where I had no father figure, where I had no one to show me that, to do that for me. And he shows up and teaches me. I'm like, oh, well, I do that. I still pull on that. Yeah. Like, God, I don't know what to do. Can you help me here? And he'll help me. He'll help things make sense. He'll help me see stuff, understand things. I'm like, oh yeah, it's those encounters that they have as a kid. Like, I still pull on it. Almost 40 years later, I pull on that one encounter as a little child that a nap brought me into. Yeah.
Hey, it's Brittney here. I'm normally on the Kylo Show, yes, but I wrote a book. I wrote a book for parents, but I talk a lot about moms. So if you're listening to this and you're a mom who's frustrated, who feels like you're failing, who feels hopeless in this game of parenting that we're in. So if that's you, mom, buy yourself this gift on Mother's Day. It's going to be worth it. So I hope that you feel blessed and encouraged by my new book, Imperfect Parenting. You can find it at imperfectparenting.co.
And I think that piece right there that you're describing, it feels like that's part of where courage comes from, is me getting close to the Father, me letting love in, which I think is part of this equation for kids. Like listening to what you described with Daniel, he had this habit from a child that he goes to his room, opens the window, and does what he's always done. Mm-hmm. But then the rest of the story is he goes back in and he's still loving, he's still bringing wisdom into confusion. Yeah. He's still bringing the kingdom into this. He's bringing this God's havoc.
Voice into God's
which feels like part of it too. Is we want our kids to not like go hide and be scared.
Yeah,
we want you to come in, get the true identity, remember who you are and who He is for you, and then take that out.
Yeah,
and go love the kids that completely disagree with you.
Yeah,
go love the teacher that's trying to have you conform to something.
Yeah,
and that's what changes everything.
A child that doesn't know who they are, that goes into the world, is going to conform to the world.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it can be, they conform because of fear, they conform because of performance or acceptance or whatever it is. Delaney had a job at a fast food place that the culture was rough.
Yeah.
I mean, rough. It was conform, fear, rejection,
Yelling.
rejection. Yeah. I mean, and so she's coming home in tears. Mm-hmm. Please let me quit. Mom, please let me quit. And I remember saying, honey, the mean people of the world don't exist just at this fast food chain.
Yeah.
They are everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are you doing to prepare your spirit for that environment? And I said, are you listening to your, emo emotional music that you love so much that is nothing for the armor of God?
It's not going to help you through this.
Or are you getting yourself in tune with the Father, connected to His presence, and going into the battlefield? Because that's your battlefield. Mm-hmm. My battlefield looks different. You and I are wired differently. So I go in there and I bring it on.
Yeah.
Mine is different. My battlefield's completely different. And so Ben and I were just challenging her to position herself into a place of worship. Yeah. And reading scriptures before she left for work and listening to worship music before she got there. And everything changed in a day.
Wow.
When she just got connected to the Father and went in with, I know who I am and I'm covered. Her ability to confront, her ability to have courage, to set a boundary, to even be like
even how they related to her changed
completely. She brought in a different person.
Yeah.
And that's what I want for our kids. Wow. And knowing the story of Daniel is I will not lose sight of who I am.
Yeah.
Regardless of the environment I'm in. But you have to lead that as a parent for your child to know how to activate that.
Yeah. Man, that's good. Like I used to, when I used to travel, there's some countries I would go to and they didn't have very good coffee. And so I would bring a glass French press with me.
Wow.
And I
Brave.
knew
You are courageous.
that I
Bring a
know.
glass.
Well, I'll tell you how I did it. I'll tell you why I had so much courage with that. I knew that if I could fill the glass French press jug with enough internal pressure, socks, clean socks, I'd fill it with clean socks. If I could put enough internal pressure inside, the external pressure couldn't break it. And I'd go all around the planet with my glass French press because I knew how to fill it with the internal pressure, the stuff that kept it. So the pressure outside from bags getting thrown on top of my bag or
whatever's in your bag,
the cold weather up at 30,000 feet in the air isn't, the internal pressure was too much for the external pressure to break it. I'm like, oh, that's what it feels like happened with Delaney. It's like, oh, she got internal pressure from God. She got filled with this pressure that the external stuff no longer affected her the same way. And the other thing too is like this verse, I just remembered this verse in Numbers 13:33. It's such a crazy verse to me. It's where the spies went and looked at the promised land and see the giants.
Yep.
This verse says,
and what they see.
yeah, they come back and they say, there we saw giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. And they're basically saying the giants saw us the same way we saw ourselves.
Yep.
They looked at us according to how we looked at us. And like, oh, if Delaney's getting changed to how she sees herself, what she's getting from God, the internal pressure, they respond and treat her differently because she's seeing herself differently. I'm like, oh, you're not a grasshopper.
Yeah.
Hey, kid, you're not a grasshopper. Hey, there's giants out there. You're not a grasshopper. Who are you? Because if you go in there thinking you're a grasshopper, they're going to treat you like a grasshopper.
Yeah. Well, the other spies that came back and saw something different too. I mean, they were out.
They saw the fruit.
They saw the fruit.
You see how big
and so
fruit
that's
is?
the difference is what happens when you see the fruit, when you see what they actually asked for. Like, can I have that land with the giants? Because I know I can take them.
Yeah.
You just have a different authority and assignment when you feel absolutely confident in what you're bringing.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, Delaney's about to go into adulthood, and there's so many more stories and journeys to come because this is her thing to work out. You know, all of our kids are so different, but I think I'm very different than Delaney.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not careful, I will get frustrated at an area that I don't struggle in because I don't have the patience to help her walk through.
Yeah.
And encourage her. And so
like she should just be okay with this because
or
you don't struggle with it.
I don't have the same empathy. Like I don't understand how to help you.
Yeah.
And so knowing that I have to actually help her walk through this, and I have to figure out my own junk to get out of the way so I actually can see her victorious in this. Otherwise, I'm just going to live frustrated and irritated at my child not growing in this area because I don't have the patience to help her walk it out.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, the great thing is Ben and I are so different. I get to tap onto him when I need it. But also, she's going to need me in this season.
Yeah.
And I have to be willing to be like, okay, how do I disciple this in you? Because this one wasn't a spot for me.
Yeah.
And that's just the thing of really inviting the Holy Spirit in is, okay, Lord, you've got to help me figure out how to build the internal pressure in this kid.
Totally.
I think, go ahead.
I was
So
going to
cute,
say,
guys.
I know.
no, you go.
You go.
Just to add to that point, and then you say something awesome as you always do. But just thinking about the Delaney and it's gone, Seth.
You lost it.
I think you need to talk.
I'll
'cause
talk
it
and
went
then
away.
you see if it comes back. I was
It's
going
gonna
to
be
say,
powerful.
like with Delaney, it's really cool. You've helped her once. She's faced a crazy culture that she's not used to.
Right.
And she's had victory. So now she has a history with God to pull on.
Absolutely.
And I know in my family with one of my sons especially, who it feels like he gets confronted with similar battles. But every time I refer back to all the other victories that he's had. I go, hey, do you remember when you had this? Do you remember when this happened? Do you remember when we prayed this? Do you remember when we talked about the lenses?
Moments.
Do you remember? And so it's like, pulling as a parent too, like for people watching, like, what's your kid's history with God? Can you remind them? Sometimes they need, it's like Delaney, a couple of years from now, whatever's happening in her life, wherever she's at, like, hey, remember when you worked at that fast food restaurant? Remember when the culture was so crazy? Remember when you started work? And then it's like, boom, oh, I have a history. I have a testimony that can happen again in my life.
Totally.
I need to pull on that thing. And that can be a huge deal for kids, because you're like, I'm just reminding you that you've already, to me, it's like David and Goliath, right? Like David's like, well, I've killed a lion and a bear. He knew his history with God. I've killed him. And they tried to get me, and I just hit him with the club. Like, I can go face a giant.
Well, and he doesn't even bother with the armor. He's like, this isn't gonna.
I can't do this.
It's not gonna help me.
And he trusted his sling. He'd used his sling a bunch. He'd fought a lion. He'd fought a bear. He'd won. He had this history he could pull on.
So good.
When everybody else was like, and the culture is all in fear. The culture is all afraid. The culture is all hiding. And he's like, give me that guy. I
got this.
I have a history with God I can pull on right now.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me of what I was going to say.
Oh, good.
Good, yes.
But just as you're both sharing, I was sitting there thinking about one of the things we often talk about in our parenting approach and tools is letting our children struggle. And I think it fits right here too, in that it's really hard to watch a child struggle when you know the answer, but they have to pave that road themselves. They have to learn to pave that road. I can show you where it is. I can help you move some of the obstacles, but you have to learn to pave that road and create the history with God.
Yeah.
So, which means that struggle, which feels like the Daniel story, he's in the middle of the struggle.
Yeah.
And his answer is, I'm going to go do what I've always done and go pray and go be thankful and watch what happens to even my spirit when I do what I know to do, because I have a history with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so I think through questions and through being okay with the struggle, I'm not going to bail you out as a parent. I don't want to bail you out of this and try and solve it for you. I want to solve it with you and keep leading you to the Father, and then watch what happens with your spiritual muscles, so to say.
Yeah.
It's definitely, parents are hopeful that if they just get their kids in the environment, or, this is what we're going to do. We're going to fast. We're going to pray. We're going to this, that will translate into ownership for the child. I think it's more of an invitation of, what do you think we should do? How are you building your relationship with the Lord? What is God saying to you? Because if we just create a route or schedule for them, there's no desire that's really given the opportunity to set a flame.
Yeah.
Because we didn't invite them into the process of creating the schedule. The joke of where you have to, when you pay for something, you value it so much more than it just being gifted to you.
Yeah.
And there's moments where, obviously it's very meaningful and all these things. And I have high value for creating routine and schedules. But as your child grows to those teenage, junior high years, if you've just created a God of schedule, then they won't have a God of relationship.
Yeah.
And that it really needs to be a place where you learn how to invite them into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of places where it gets messy, unintentionally messy for parents. So, but we should do a question, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, we should.
That's true.
We have one here.
We do. And it's kind of that crazy world that's coming crashing at our door.
Yeah, a lot of confusion here. I'll read it.
All right.
My son is going into 3rd grade at my school district, which is a small county school, but we're seeing elementary kids come into school saying they're bisexual or transgender. My husband and I aren't quite sure how we should navigate this with our son. He hasn't ever mentioned anything to us at this point, but we want to be prepared, and we want him to hear information from us first, which we've talked about that a lot.
First mention.
Which I would encourage them to jump on this. If they haven't had this conversation, you actually might be behind a little bit if it's already happening.
Yeah, and they're seeing it.
Yeah. So, I think going back to the Garden of Eden, there's a man and a woman. There's only 2 options, and nowhere in there to talk about changing.
Yeah.
And what is the covenant of marriage was really birthed in the garden. I mean, that was kind of their wedding.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to break that down to a third grade level. I think you probably accomplished that pretty well. And I would, again, like we've been talking about, making this conversation of sex a normal practice. And so, Lincoln, he is our little justice meter. He's very quietly justice filled. He was seeing the pride flag and he would get angry. And I'm like, I understand that you're so in black and white in this stage, but the anger that you feel is not the best position, son. You've got to lean into love and forgiveness. And really trying to explain that it's not acceptance, but God wants us to love all people. And I tell him, I'm like, do you know what the rainbow really means? And I just remind him of what it means. So when you see that flag, you just declare God's promise. And do not let them claim it as something that it wasn't originally designed for. And so we talk about it in that space instead of being afraid. We take trying to be powerful as a stance in the conversation.
I've had to navigate that a bit with my kids. They were in a school a while back, similar stuff. Like, hey, I don't know if this one child is a girl or a boy. And we'd talked about it beforehand, but, I've had to help navigate that because one of my kids would be like, I can't believe it. Like, just passionate. And I'm going, hey, I understand you're passionate, but how do you think that would come across if you're speaking to them? Would they feel loved from you, or would they feel attacked? Would they feel judged? Yeah. And like, okay, if they feel that, how does that help them? Does that help them? And so really helping go, hey, we have some pretty strong beliefs. We believe what we believe, but how we go about saying that and talking to people who believe differently and loving people when we don't agree and being okay. Like it's an interesting world, but my kids would come to me. We'd had talks about this stuff before. We'd had conversations, and then it was navigating like, how do you approach this in a way that's like, oh, I love you. I want to be friends with you. Let's play on the playground. Let's hang out. And the way, if I do talk to you about this stuff at some point, I want it to come across loving, not attacking.
Yeah. Where's the love of the Father and your approach to this person?
Yeah.
And it's such an ongoing conversation too, right? Just like sex. I think the same way, what's the inflow of information? What's coming in the direction of your child? So it's a continued conversation of what are you encountering, what's happening, and then how are you handling it internally and externally?
Yeah.
It's both things you're talking about. It's the truth and the love.
Yeah.
So the truth remains solid, and I'm not compromising that. But people get to experience love around me because if my truth causes me to be experienced as unloving, there's a breakdown somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I think this is part of the problem is people experience the church. They're like, where's the love? I thought Jesus was loving.
Or it's the other way. We are loving to accepting.
Right. And that's not the goal. So the truth has to be set and clear based on the Bible.
Yeah.
What we believe. And then love doesn't have to mean acceptance.
Yeah. Which,
again, we're back in Babylon. There's confusion.
You and I talked about this late last night.
We did for a while.
Like, you consider me a true friend if I said, hey, Ben, there's a little some stuff in your teeth. You'd go, oh my gosh, thank you. I want to get it out. I got to get this out of my teeth. Thank you. If I didn't tell you and we're hanging out for 4 hours and you're like, bro,
you go to the bathroom.
And you go to the bathroom, like, bro, I've been sitting here for 4 hours and you didn't tell me what was in my teeth. You're like, oh, you're kind of not really a friend.
It's because I love you that I didn't tell you. Wait, what?
No, it's because I love you that I did tell you to. And so I think that's a lot of times in this conversation, any of these conversations like this, it's like, oh, people have believed that love means I agree with everything you do. And technically, I don't probably agree with anyone in the world 100%. You know what I mean?
Not even your own wife?
No, we totally don't agree on every single thing.
I'm trying to decide am I going to answer that question or not.
Yeah.
I'm right here.
Do you guys agree on every single thing?
No.
We're married. No.
But you choose relationship and connection over agreement. And when we disagree, we have something deeper than that. And it's like, oh, love is I can actually disagree with you, and we still love each other. Like, oh, I don't have to agree with everything. Otherwise, you're going to be alone. Everyone's going to be alone.
Well, otherwise you're afraid. You just live afraid, and you have no real depth of relationships because I don't get to be myself or be known, which is what everybody craves, is to be known and have this intimate connection.
Yeah.
And I think parents can probably start practicing this today, even in the home, in that family. Like when we disagree, how do we handle that?
Yeah.
And so there's little things. We start pointing back at those moments going, okay, in the bigger disagreements, how are we handling that now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, it all comes down to some of the stuff we think is the most important thing in the world, connection. It's like, hey, if you're connected to these other kids, they'll value your voice. You have influence, and you can talk with them. But a lot of times people try to do it without the connection. Parents try to correct kids without connection. Kids try to correct other kids without connection. People try to do that stuff. Like, wait,
it's called social media.
Yeah, it is.
I'm so
It's
offended
very much
all the time.
Yeah.
All right. We could talk forever on this. I feel like so good. But love it. I guess just keep leading your kids in this crazy world that we're living in.
Yeah, we're in Babylon, but
we've got a secret weapon.
we've got a secret weapon.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on the Imperfect Parenting podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.